Presidential candidates are coming to Illinois, and former Governor Rod Blagojevic is leaving Illinois. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoneburg from the State Journal-Register, and today we really will talk about some federal issues because we've got a presidential campaign coming up. And I've got a couple of political watchers from different venues who know a lot of stuff, so this is good. Kent Redfield is here, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at University of Illinois Springfield, still doing all kinds of work, so we should all be as busy as you when we're retired. Kent, welcome.
Good to be here.
Benjamin Yount is here. He is Illinois Bureau Chief for Illinois Statehouse News.
We could work one more Illinois in there somehow.
We could. You're an Illinois guy. Welcome. Well, all of a sudden, while nobody expected this, with Super Tuesday having just passed in the presidential campaigns, it now looks like Illinois may indeed be important in the Republican presidential race. Kent, how's it looking?
Well, we expect that Santorum is probably going to do pretty well in the next round of primaries, and so Illinois becomes important either to kind of for Santorum to spring the big surprise, or for Romney to kind of regain that air of inevitability that he's going to be the nominee,
which he keeps trying to get after every round.
Yeah, so we're already spending money. At least the super PAC associated with Romney is spending money. So Illinois is going to get a lot of attention, and it's usually over when you get to Illinois.
Yeah, this is a bit of a surprise, and I think that for reporters, many in the press room who have been able to sleep through a lot of these primaries in the past couple of years in Illinois, we're going to actually have to do some work this year. It'll be very, very interesting. When we were drawing up our plan, we were getting ready to cover some Statehouse races, but now we're going to have to focus on the presidential race. You always have questions: who's going to turn out? Where will the vote be the heaviest? Illinois has traditionally seen a lot of very conservative primary voters. So I think that if the traditions hold, Santorum may have some pockets of support, but I think that Romney has a very good ground game here. Dan Rutherford, the Illinois treasurer, who is Romney's Illinois chairperson, was talking to me the day after the Iowa caucuses saying, hey, we have a ground game in Illinois, and if this goes past Super Tuesday, we are ready. These other candidates are not. There are some questions who all has delegates that will actually, are on the ballot in all of the congressional districts.
Right.
So it's I think just from an organizational standpoint, that really helps when you have to pop in and out of these states. But I'll be interested to see who turns out and where.
Yeah, well, Rick Santorum, I know, of the 69 delegates that Illinois will send to the Republican National Convention, 54 are getting elected in congressional districts. You vote for the person, and the word for either Santorum or Romney or Gingrich or Paul is next to their name. Gingrich and Romney and Paul all have full slates of 54 delegates and 54 alternates across the state. Santorum only has 44 delegates, and there are 3 kind of inner city districts in Chicago where their late campaign they did not even try. But they did try to get delegates in the new 13th congressional district, which includes some of Springfield and goes over to Champaign and Decatur. But an envelope actually got lost at the State Board of Elections. It didn't have enough signatures on it anyway, but if all of their opposing objections to petitions would have been there was kind of an armistice. Everybody said, okay, we'll let your candidates on if you filed. As it turns out, they just didn't get filed. So the Santorum people are saying in Illinois, what we want you to do is vote for President Santorum, which in Illinois is the beauty contest, which means nothing for convention delegates, but it could help build momentum. But otherwise, there are 4 districts and oddly one in central Illinois that might have been a good Santorum base, where they're not going to have delegate candidates. But I'd like to just remember a little bit, and certainly Kent, you were around. Al Salvi is a friend of Santorum. Al Salvi because Rick Santorum, when he was in the Senate, came to Illinois to campaign for Al Salvi, running against Dick Durbin, I think it was in '96.
Right.
And they became friends, and it turns out they graduated a couple years apart from the same high school in Northern Illinois, because Santorum's father was like a military person, a psychologist who came to that region, and so that's where he graduated high school, in Illinois, so he's like the Illinois candidate. It just has seemed like the establishment, as Ben said, is really makes this a Romney state, but I don't know.
Yeah, it is hard to tell. It is, I mean, certainly because Santorum's campaign has been kind of on a shoestring all along. They did not have anybody on, any delegates. They weren't on the ballot in Virginia on Super Tuesday, and therefore, they lost all of those delegates. So Santorum has the enthusiasm, he has the popular vote, but he keeps, through screw-ups and other things, that doesn't translate into delegates. And the Romney people want to talk delegates, and they're going to talk delegates when they get to Illinois. Even if they just eke out a little bit in the popular vote, we know they're going to get a majority of the delegates. But about half the vote is suburban collar counties in a Republican primary typically. But about half of it's downstate. Almost 5% of the vote comes out of the city of Chicago for Republican
Not
primary.
A Republican stronghold.
No. There's no reason. So there certainly is. Santorum is going to be attractive to those people that want that kind of pure conservative candidate, and we're going to see a replaying of what we're seeing nationally between, who's the best general election candidate versus, who's the true conservative, and it just keeps playing out.
You see this in all these states. You see this anytime there's the Republican primary. It is, do you have the conservative wing turnout? A lot of people who vote in primaries really want to. Voters who may vote for Mitt Romney in the general election may not even bother to go out for the primary. So it becomes. This is why I think, and it's been my experience covering the campaigns, a ground game really, really helps to get your people to the polls. But some of the people who are Tea Party members or who believe in Santorum, they have that natural fire. They don't necessarily need a machine. I think the math of where the votes are, it's. You would think that Romney would have an edge, but you can't say that Santorum will be a very attractive candidate to some of the people who traditionally vote in the Republican primary.
It's funny. I like to think of Illinois, or look at Illinois, as kind of middle of the road Republican because, like the governors that we've generally elected, Jim Edgar, Jim Thompson, are middle of the road on social issues. But sometimes we nominate more conservative people like Al Salvi, who lost, but also like Peter Fitzgerald, who won for U.S. Senate. So, given special circumstances.
Even look at the Republican primary in the governor's race. That, Bill Brady beats out Kirk Dillard because you had a split of the vote from
you had
DuPage
5
County.
candidates. That lucky man.
But he comes out. He's the far more conservative candidate in there, and you saw that he lost to Pat Quinn in a Republican year to a man who was promising to raise your taxes,
which was not easy to do.
No, so that's the thing is that if you have, particularly in some parts of downstate Illinois, some conservative voters who will on their own without having to be prompted by a precinct committeeman go to the polls, Santorum could have a good showing. But it's delegates is what is going to end up mattering in Tampa, and Dan Rutherford was planning this in January.
Well, he
March.
plans well ahead. That's why he's state treasurer after being in the legislature for many years and being a legislative aide to Tom Ewing before that in the Illinois House. Anyway, this is, it's a difficult subject, but Rod Blagojevic is headed to prison within several days, has promised that he will have some kind of public statement since being convicted on, I guess, a total of, 19 or 20 counts over 2 trials, most of them in the second one. He's going, we think, to Colorado. The family might even move out there, and he's going to say something, and he hasn't given interviews, before this planned departure for a 14-year sentence, which it looks like he'll serve at least most of that at age 55, I believe. Thoughts on what he might say and what we should think?
You just never know with Rod Blagojevic. I mean, and so it has been, the fact that you haven't heard anything from him has been unusual because he normally has something to say and likes to stay in the limelight. you'd like to think it's kind of sinking in and that he's going to give some kind of measured statement that really kind of reflects the gravity of the situation. But I guess, people that have been observing him, over the last 8-10 years would not be surprised by anything. So it will be interesting.
He all during the trial period, he would always say, I'm innocent, this is wrong, they didn't understand the full context of what I said. But now, particularly that second jury really got him.
I think that you're going to hear from the governor the same thing you've heard from the governor all along, and you said it. I'm not guilty. I'm innocent. Play all the tapes. Truth will be told. It's at this point, what does he have to lose? He's looking at 14 years in prison. He can say whatever he wants. This is the governor loved to be on the trail. He loved to campaign for governor far more than he actually loved being the governor.
He was a very good campaigner. He has charisma.
This is, he is going away for a long time, and he's going to bask in that glow. And when he gets out, we'll want to hear from him. But for 14 years, nobody's going to talk to him. So he's going to grab a hold of that spotlight and that microphone and look into those cameras and say, "I'm still not guilty. I'm going to go do my time, but I'll be back."
And it's just, there's a poignancy because I keep thinking back to when the first conviction, and it was just on the one count, and
of lying to the FBI,
yeah,
about not knowing who was contributing to him.
And he's back at his house, and he's just going to say a few words and go inside, and he just pauses at the doorway with that bunch of reporters out there, and he couldn't help himself, and he just went back, and he had to be in front of the camera. And so how he plays this with the reality has been said that, this is the last public statement he's going to make for quite a long time. We have post-Blagojevic hangover on the budget and everything else, but Blagojevic, the man, is going away, and it's going to be interesting.
Well, on the human level, you have to feel sorry for his daughters and his wife, although Patty, I'm sure, will get some kind of gainful employment. And of course, her father is Alderman Dick Mell of Chicago, who's also, I think, been successful in business, so I think they won't starve, but it's a difficult situation. And there we go. What can you say? It's just a very odd situation. There were a bunch of sign-carrying demonstrators walking through the streets of Springfield this week in favor of more gun rights, less gun laws. Ben, I think you were involved in reporting on this. Illinois is now, I think Washington, D.C. still has, you can't carry a concealed weapon or a gun in public, but Illinois is the only state.
Illinois is the only state.
So will that change? How soon? And where's the fight?
I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. The math in Illinois, you need 71 votes because concealed carry or any sort of carry legislation would preempt home rule. The speaker long ago decided it's going to take 71 votes. Brandon Phelps, Democrat from Harrisburg, Southern Illinois, who's sponsoring this go-round with concealed carry, says he has almost 70 votes, but that could mean anything from 65 to 70. It's not going to change. And the reality is you had anywhere from 1,500 to 7,000 for the people who got mad at me on YouTube, marchers in the streets, but they're not going to convince lawmakers from Chicago to change their mind.
Yeah, but even the Supreme Court has said Chicago has to allow people to own guns in their own homes because there was a case out of Chicago. And even the State Journal-Register's editorial recently said that it looks inevitable that some form of concealed carry will happen in the 50th state.
But it'll probably happen because of a court order. I do not see the General Assembly voting and allowing this to happen. And part of the argument from supporters is pass a law now that may have some restrictions, because if the court is to just simply order concealed carry, you have no idea what's going to come down in an order. Come on, everybody's got to run for election in November. I don't see anybody running for election in Chicago after they come down and allow people to carry a gun.
Interesting. Kent, any thoughts on that one?
Well, from constitutional law standpoint, the court has said, yes, it's a right. You can own a gun, you can own it and have it in your home. When you're in public, then legislatures can pass reasonable restrictions on where, when, and under what circumstances. So would the courts just say Illinois has to pass a law, allowing it but regulating it? I don't know. That's that's a little bit of a you're always a crapshoot when you go in front of the courts. This is a very regional issue. It's an urban rural, but it's also a Chicago suburban downstate issue. We don't know what kind of General Assembly, both in content, but also where these people are coming from. I mean, we've done a redistricting, and Chicago lost population, but through a creative map, they're not going to lose representation.
That's right, because they have all the new districts finger into the suburbs, so they still may be Chicago-centric.
Downstate is losing population. It will have fewer members in the General Assembly. And so, if they don't get it done this time, I think there's going to be some urgency to try and get it done, because you really don't know what the kind of the geographic makeup is going to be of the new legislature.
And that was the one thing that Phelps said when we talked to him, that he's spoken with a number of lawmakers who are leaving office who have now said they will vote for concealed carry. But you got to get 71 in the House, then you have to get it called in the Illinois Senate.
By John Cullerton,
who
is the man who passed seatbelts and helmets, or wants helmets on motorcycles, right?
Is pushed for a cigarette tax. So the mayor of Chicago counters with he wants a statewide handgun registration and a tax on ammunition.
I was thinking of making that point. There is a new powerful mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who is clearly in the gun control side of things, or at least in that direction, and I think carries a lot of weight because of his newness, and I think a lot of people anywhere in his sphere may fall in line. He actually came to Peoria and was talking this week because he's trying to build regional alliances to make Chicago more part of Illinois in public perception. How's that going to work?
Well, and
Chicago to Peoria Expressway flights?
I don't know. Well, we'll see what happens. It's not that far a drive.
And it opens up, I mean, in addition to the legislative leaders and the governor, now we have the legislative leaders, the governor, and the mayor in ways that we haven't had for a while. And so how that dynamic plays out, Governor Quinn needs Rahm Emanuel's support on lots of things. So that that certainly could play in the calculus if it ever got to the governor's desk.
Yeah, but that's one of the points that was made, is that because it's going to take 71, it's going to take a supermajority to pass for home rule. If it ever does pass, the governor can't stop it because it's a veto-proof majority. Although there are the procedural hoops to jump through, and you never know, somebody may jump off at the last minute.
Very interesting. Well. The elephant in the room, not to be political one side or the other, but in everything that happens at the Statehouse, money is a big deal, and I think the Senate just went along with the House to approve a new revenue estimate for the coming fiscal year, and of course, everything about the spring session is building the budget, taking the governor's recommendation, passing a budget that will take effect for the next fiscal year, which starts July 1. And the revenue estimate that the legislature has passed is $231 million less than what the governor's people said it was going to be. So, which means there's a giant squeeze anyway. You have the governor wanting agencies to cut 9%, the governor wanting other constitutional officers to cut 9%. And some of them are saying we can't do it. So how is this money situation playing out? We could talk about perhaps the constitutional officers, with Attorney General Madigan saying, I can't cut much because we need lawyers to earn the money that we're earning for the state. Jesse White says they might have to close Secretary of State offices, 5 of them, or facilities if they are held too tightly.
That's one of the things that is really going to start to make the budget. Charging a fee at a state park and closing down a driver's license facility. That's what a lot of people. That's how people interact with state government. Unless you depend on the social service net. A good chunk of average everyday Illinoisans don't have a whole lot of interaction with state government. But yeah, if I have to wait longer or drive further to get my driver's license renewal or my new license plates, and if I want to take a picnic over to Weldon Springs, but I got to pay $25 to get in the gate, that's going to become real. I think that some of this is show that
they wouldn't charge 25, would they?
I have no idea what it would be. I mean,
But there's talk, and I think they actually. I've heard that the Department of Natural Resources actually could do this administratively, but there is legislation that would call
Yeah,
for certain
yeah,
fees.
you have to do it, but
Yeah.
we are atypical that we don't charge some amount for particularly more popular parks, and there are administrative issues, but it is, budget cutting is tough. We're back to the old, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And so it's about particular programs. Some of the biggest budget cutters in the General Assembly are up in arms because the governor is threatening to close a state facility in their district.
Right. Well, of course, we just, in the viewing area of this program in Jacksonville, there was another hearing by COGFA, the
Commission on Government Forecasting
and Accountability. With really the community of Jacksonville saying keep Jacksonville Developmental Center open, and the experts from the state, and also from like the Arc of Illinois, which is one of the groups that provides group home settings, saying it's really Illinois lags behind in the proper treatment of developmentally disabled people, and we need to move into community settings. It's a terrible fight. But so, Ben, you talked about people don't want to wait longer to do things or to pay to get in state parks, but then we still have $8 billion in unpaid bills and a budget squeeze. So what is the state going to do?
Well, this is the thing, is that the reality, you could charge more for parks, you could close down all of the Secretary of State facilities, and that wouldn't even touch the big issues in the budget. Medicaid and pensions are huge costs compared to some of these. It's 5 driver's license facilities in the scope of a $33 billion budget are nickels and dimes. But these are the kinds of real cuts. When you say, hey, you have to cut your budget 9%, Secretary of State, this is what happens. This is what smaller government looks like. And this shows, if we're up in arms this much about a 9% cut to the Secretary of State's office, how is Illinois going to cut $2.7 billion from Medicaid? This is a couple of $100 million.
There are committees meeting to try to figure out what's going on with Medicaid and what's going on with pensions. Any word yet on what that resolution will be when they report in April to the governor? And those are tough nuts to crack, aren't they?
There's more chance of something happening after the primary than before the primary. There's probably more chance of something happening after the general election than there is before the general election. Part of
lame duck sessions are often very productive.
And this is about getting to November. The Democrats want to look really tough on revenue estimates and really tough on how we're dealing with the state budget, look tougher than the governor, because that's a good position to be in running in November. Right. And whether we come, but we can't get, that doesn't make these go away.
Right.
We've got huge problems that are going to take serious cuts in revenue, or one or the other or both, and we're not engaging them yet.
I'll frame this somewhat carefully, but the Illinois Policy Institute is kind of it's a group that seems to be growing and raises like a couple $1 million a year and has a growing staff, and they keep saying things like repeal the income tax, and their new budget plan alternate for the state is cut all state employees by 10%. I remember last year, 10% their pay, and do all these things, make grant programs competitive, so you cut out a bunch of people who are getting grants now. Is any of this a realistic addition to the process, or is it just more rhetoric for some who don't want to spend any money to use?
We talked to Dan Katowski today, as we're taping this.
Senator,
part of the budget team there in the Senate, and he said, listen, I don't care who's got any ideas, Democrats, Republicans, if they're good ideas, they're realistic ideas, and they'd save the state money, at this point everything has to be on the table. That being said, the IPI, or the Illinois Policy Institute, they're not supposed to be called IPI.
Because something else is IPI.
Yeah, I got warned about that once. The Institute's plan would have the spending not at 33.7, which is what the General Assembly, or 33.9, which is what the governor wants. They want to go down to 29.4. which would be a massive cut. And they don't really spell out exactly what that means. They throw out the big numbers, but then they don't say, okay, what's that going to mean for Jesse White? What's that going to mean for this? And
Well, it's interesting, because I remember during the last campaign they said we should no longer be funding like the state fair, or unless it makes money itself, and county fairs. And I remember asking Governor Quinn about that, and Quinn, who calling people names at other points, called them pinheads for having this idea. And I was reminded of that by someone on their staff later.
Some of it is what they're proposing is clearly cost shifting. If you abolish the local government distributive fund, which is part of the income tax that goes to cities and counties on a per capita basis, and take that revenue and pay unpaid bills, then you certainly have helped the state's bottom line, but you have counties and cities that are laying off firemen and policemen, and their local government is probably leaner and meaner than state government. So there's cost shifting there. There's cost shifting to schools, taking away
like pension, paying if local downstate schools pay pensions for their teachers. That's a cost shift even the governor wants. That is meeting a lot of resistance.
Yeah, and there's some inside baseball in terms of trying to not allow places with property tax caps or tax increment financing to have that not count against them when you're figuring the state aid formula, all of which means less money for locals, and therefore the state has more money to pay its bills or to pay pensions. And so there's an awful lot of cost shifting in what they're proposing.
Okay. Go ahead.
The taxpayers somewhere are going to pick up that tab. If local governments get cut, or if school districts have to all of a sudden start paying for retirement costs, could mean property tax increases. The bottom line is, people at home are going to end up paying for the government that they get one way or another. Just depends on what level.
Okay, we have about a half a minute left, and as we tape the show, Bruce Weber is still the basketball coach of U of I. Do we think that will last? Quick answer.
I think not. I think that we're probably the U of I is probably going to be paying $2 or $3 million a year for people not to coach. The football coach, basketball coach, and both basketball coaches.
Another fiscal reality. Quick,
a box and his last paycheck were sitting in the locker room. He may have had to walk home from the tournament.
All right, we'll see how it goes. I'm not knowledgeable enough to even give an answer, but thank you, gentlemen. Kent Redfield, thank you. Ben Yount, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoneburg, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.